Welcome to this special live edition of Seahawks Forever from Mobile, Alabama. See, can't you tell? I'm sitting in the stands, stadium behind me. Yeah, no, just thought I'd play around with the virtual background a little bit. Today is the day that kind of sets everything up for the week. So I thought I would hop in before I go down to the stadium, pick up my credentials, and hit the day one press conference and just kind of go over some of the things that will be happening over the next few days, sort of set the week and what you can expect here from me and on this channel. But also, we do have some new information. This is the day that the players measure in, and there are already some interesting things coming out of that. Some players measuring in bigger, taller, stronger, faster. Well, we don't know that part yet. Bigger, taller, longer than we expected, which is a good thing. But some also falling short of the marks that we expected based on what they've been listed at. We'll do that. We'll take your questions and comments. And you know what? If you still, after sleeping on it for a night, have some things to say or some questions about the hire of Clint Kubiak as new offensive coordinator for the Seahawks, we can get into that again, too. I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Here we go.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Well, I guess that's not going to work. So on that note, last night, we got about 45, 50 minutes into our reaction show on the Clint Kubiak hire with Bryce Coots, and hotel Wi-Fi didn't really cooperate, kind of crapped out on us. So we lost the last part of that show. I've got a couple things that I got to pick up today that should help boost the signal a little bit and prevent that from happening again. But some of the media, it looks like, might just be a little stubborn. So before we get into this, let me just do this and remind you guys that the show is brought to you by the folks at BetUS. And if you head over to the website right now, they'll give you a sign-up bonus when you open a new account of 150% on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third deposits, up to $2,000. Check that out. Yeah, so we're just getting, let's just get the media back up here and we'll just go straight up with this. Apologize for those. So today is kind of the day where everything gets set. So a lot of the players checked in last night. There were a few of them on the flight, on my flight from Dallas to Mobile, actually, at the time. And then today they obviously get their playbooks and they kind of figure out sort of who they're with and which team they're on. And some of them will find out how they are intended to be used this week. But also, there's some meetings going on this morning with the NFL Players Association. This is sort of the beginning of the education of these young men as they begin to make the transition from college to the NFL. An education that it might be interesting to talk to some people this week about this. The idea that because players are getting paid now in college, that transition for some is a little bit less jarring because they're not going from nothing to being paid. But they just kind of go through what it's like to be a professional and some of the things they can expect as they move from one realm to another. And then practices start tomorrow. So just to go over that, there is the introductory press conference today at 3:30 Central Time, so 1:30 Pacific Time. Executive Director Jim Nagy, former Seattle Seahawks scout, of course, will be speaking at that press conference along with a couple of players. Don't know who those players are yet. So we'll definitely be going live tonight, give you my thoughts on some of the things I heard and saw. But today's kind of all about the measurements. We're going to get into those in a minute. And then practices start tomorrow. Practice schedule Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is the same. National team practice from 9:30 to 11 o'clock. Again, that's Central Standard Time. And then there's a half-hour break, and the American team takes over from 12 to 2, and then there's media availabilities after that. So that'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So we are allowed to shoot anything that we want during those practices, but we're restricted on how much of it we can show each day. We're limited to like 2 minutes. And so as much as I can, I'll kind of show you some of my favorite highlights and things that I saw, and certainly some of the players that I'll be looking at. And then Wednesday after practices is a full media day where we get full availability. The media availability is pretty limited after each practice to about a 10-minute period. And so I will be trying to grab some guys here and there that I think might be of interest to the Seahawks. But mostly my intention down here is to watch and observe and analyze and pass along my thoughts to you, and also really get familiar with the kind of the core of this draft class, right? Like not everybody's here. We know that, right? The top 2 quarterbacks, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, aren't here. And some of the players that played in the college football playoff championship aren't here. Most notably, a bunch of the Ohio State players, Jack Sawyer, Will Howard. Would love to have gotten eyes on those guys. But it's such a whirlwind kind of getting through the season and then the transition. And then in Seahawk world here, we've had coaching news and everything else, that this is sort of when I typically begin really digging in and getting to know the first 2 or 3 rounds of this draft more intimately. And I've never been able to do it this up close and personal and watch these guys in person. So I'll be focusing more on that than, getting to know these guys personally and leaning real heavily on interviews. I'll touch into that sort of when I think it's appropriate, when I can. But my intention is to pass along as much of my observations and thoughts on this as possible, and also other people's thoughts and observations. Today is about measurements, as I said, and already there's some interesting ones that have come out, and I want to kind of go over some of these with you because we're all looking at the trenches, right? And that'll be my focus. If I could create a pie chart for you on where my eyes are going to be over the next 3 or 4 days, I'm guessing 60 to 70% of it's going to be in the trenches on both sides of the football. Because I think as much as this is a good overall class of talent down here, those 2 groups seem to stand out the most. Lots of variety, lots of depth, kind of whatever you're looking for, any flavor, shape, size on either side of the ball. On the offensive side, pick your poison. I mean, pick your position. A lot of you would like to see the Seahawks get 4 new offensive linemen in place by week 1 this year, maybe leave Charles Cross there, right? I've talked at length on this show about how that's not really reasonable, nor should it be, because they've invested so heavily the last couple of years in bringing in young offensive line talent, maybe with not as high a draft picks as some of you would have liked. But they're not just going to give up on all of that. The guys like the Satawa Lameas and Christian Haynes and Jalen Sundell and Mike Jarrells of the world, and even Anthony Bradford still, and Ola Watimi. And so, I've talked about how I think their best approach this offseason is to sign a very solid veteran guard. Doesn't have to be Trey Smith, doesn't have to be the top of the market. Brian Nemhauser on the show Friday echoed that. He thinks they will be a little bit more aggressive in free agency and signing a good veteran than maybe most of you would expect. And then also try to add at least 1 premier talent in this draft. And ideally, a guy that has some versatility. There are a bunch of people, bunch of players here in Mobile that can play all 3 of the interior line positions, center and guard. There are a bunch of them that can play guard and tackle. And this is another point that Brian made on Friday, not because they have to. A lot of times we get down here and we get into the draft process and you start hearing about tackles that should kick into guard, or sometimes these analysts just assume that they're a guard only because of dimensions and length. But until today, a lot of those measurements and some of that length is just observational qualified guesses and speculation based on how a guy looks. He looks like he has short arms. And then they get here and it's confirmed or it's disproven, sometimes on the positive side and sometimes on the negative side. But sometimes those guys have to move inside out of necessity. Not necessarily the case with this class. When you hear about some of these prospects that can play guard or tackle, try to keep an open mind and don't let that be a negative because of other prospects you've seen in the past. He's got short arms. He's got a kick inside. Troy Fatanu last year was a good example, I think, coming out of the University of Washington, one of the best offensive line prospects in the country, period. And you heard a lot of that maybe he would be better suited to play guard because he was barely 6'4". That's a little shy of what teams look for in a tackle. And there was some concern about the arm length. Well, guess what? The Steelers didn't care because they just saw the tape and they saw what they had on their hands when he got to them. and kept him at tackle before the injury anyway, and then he ended up missing his entire rookie year. More guys like that down here. Let me give you two examples of players who have measured in today, and it actually made them look better, considering what we're looking for out of that position. So you've heard the name Armand Membao in the last couple of days and in the last week. Brian brought him up. Bryce Coots and I talked about him over on The Pick Is In. Perfect example of what I'm talking about. Kind of fits that Troy Fatanu mold in that there was some concern about his length. So measured in officially at 6'3.5", 6'3 6/10 to be exact. That's not ideal to play right tackle in the NFL. But 332 pounds, you see the base, you see the anchor on tape, and 34-inch arms. Now, if he was 6'3 with 32-inch arms, he's a guard. Might even be a center. 34-inch arms, you can get that done. And when you watch the tape, he looks like a tackle. He can play tackle. He can play either. Another guy that you've heard me talk about and that has really been one of my favorite prospects to date, of the 16 or 17 that I've really watched tape on up till this point to prep for the game, Jonah Savanaya out of Arizona. You've seen him mocked to Seattle and talked a lot. Very similar, exact same height as Membao, 6'3 6/10, but again, 34.5-inch arms to go with that 339-pound frame. So you watch the tape, absolutely can stick at tackle, but could also move inside and maybe be an all-pro type mauling guard, but with the athleticism at that side to also get to the second level. Two great examples of what I'm talking about here, where the height might not be what you want, but the arm length checks out, and that's huge for them and their draft prospects. Because for these guys, when you want to look at it from their perspective, they want as many options as possible. If they can offer versatility to these teams, that just helps their cause. And so for the Seahawks, I think this makes all the sense in the world. If you're looking at drafting a guy that might have a shot to compete, especially on day 1 or 2, you would expect them to have a shot to compete at right guard with all the bodies they're going to have there with Bradford and Lamea, potentially Christian Haynes, although I think he's going to get more run at left guard potentially, and maybe even some center. To get a guy that can come in day 1 and start and upgrade your right guard position and be a long-term fix there. But also, what if Abe Lucas has a setback with his knee? Or what if they get to the end of his contract, don't want to give him he's not eligible for the 5th-year option because he was a 3rd-round draft pick. What if they don't want to extend him? Even if he's healthy all year, but he just doesn't play up to their standards. Or he plays well enough that he could command, 10, 12, $15 million on the free agent market, and they just can't really make that work because they also have to make a decision on Charles Cross's 5th-year option, which will be pretty expensive, and extend him. Well, guess what? Now you have a guy in place in a guy like Membao or Savanaya, just for example, that if you have another guard option, you can kick outside to tackle. So I think a guy like that would make a lot of sense. Another player you've heard a lot about down here this week is Marshall edge Mike Green, who is one of the most twitched up, explosive, productive players that we're going to see down here. And one of those small school guys that I kind of think makes this week really, really special. Hang on a second. I lost Jim Nagy's tweet here with all these measurables. But Mike Green, there was some concern about length with him. And he is borderline. He is kind of a tweener, where some teams might see him maybe a little bit more as a 3-4 outside linebacker. But he measures in at 6'3", just over 6'3", just a shade over, 251 pounds. There was some concern he might be in the 235 to 240 range. And then just over 32-inch arms. So the arm length isn't what you would really want. But when you see this guy get around the edge and his explosiveness and bend, really impressive. Another guy that I really can't wait to get eyes on tomorrow, Iowa defensive tackle Yaha Black. I said that there were a bunch of different shapes and sizes and flavors in both sides of the trenches this week. Black is a good example of what you're going to find on the interior of the defensive line. Last year, that was a real shy position group in this draft, right? There was Tavondre Sweat, and there weren't a lot of other guys. And, we were looking for that in the draft last year and just couldn't find a whole bunch of it. And we've talked at length all season long about how that should be a need for the Seahawks going into this draft if they can get it, is a guy that projects as more of a true 0 or 1 technique to provide a little bit of an opportunity for Byron Murphy to move around more, play more 3 technique, and kind of bounce back and forth, and along with Leonard Williams, and kind of free him up to penetrate a little bit and get after the quarterback more. Yahya Black, 6'5.5", 337, 35-inch arms. Yeah, that'll translate. That'll work. And then one of the most interesting physical specimens that everyone is intrigued by down here, Deion Walker. Talked about him with Brian a little bit on Friday. Defensive lineman for Kentucky, can get out and play big edge as well too, even at his size. Had been listed, this is where it goes the other way, had been listed at 6'6" and as much as 355. Checks in at 6'7", 3'7". He's 6'7", 340 with 34.5-inch arms. So a little more svelte, a little taller, and a little lighter than he'd been listed in some places, which I think makes him more intriguing. He's already explosive. Wait until you see how this guy can move. A little bit high cut. There's some concern about his base, but, a guy that, being able to play him inside and also kick him out as a big edge, that would be fun. And then another example of a guy going the other way. This is a player that I talked about on the Pick Is In pod with Bryce the other day as one of the corners that I couldn't wait to see down here, because he kind of fits that old Pete Carroll sea hockey mode that some teams are still looking for. They want that long physical corner. He'd been listed just about all year and on just about every scouting service you can find at 6'4". Checks in at just over 6'2", 6'2 and a third, 197 pounds, 33.25-inch arms. I mean, that'll get it done. That's still a long corner, but whole different ball game than 6'4". So just a couple of cool examples there of how some of those measurements can just give us a little additional context on some of these players. So can't wait to see them when we get in there. Let's get over and see what you guys have to say. How are we feeling today as we head over to the Senior Bowl, and how are we feeling about Clint Kubiak a day later, now that you've had a chance to absorb it all? Hawkmaniac 09 with the super thanks. Have a beer for me while you're on the road. I appreciate that very much, and I will do that, sir. Again, the plan for this week is I'm going to lean on lives for a couple of reasons. I just want to be able to react as quickly as possible to things that I see. You may see multiple lives a day. You may see some of them from my phone, from the stadium, just giving quick thoughts. And then, again, I'm working on trying to boost the Wi-Fi situation here to where I can do more things. You've already seen, though, here, the, having trouble uploading some media. And so I'm a little concerned that if I, produce a show with, kind of a graphics intensive show like I usually do, that the upload time would just take a little too long. So still looking into options for that. But as long as I'm able to go live and just do this, I mean, that works, and then we can get the engagement and interact and get my thoughts. And then Senior Bowl week doesn't end when I get back. I will take all of the things that I've seen, heard, learned, videotaped, recorded while down here, and then create a bunch of content once I'm back home in the studio for that. So I appreciate that. I will. That didn't happen last night. It's funny. I one of the things that I'm interested to do down here is try some of the local food, and I've gotten some good recommendations, and I intend to follow up on that. And there's a couple of places close by, just within walking distance. But after traveling all day yesterday, I mean, my turnaround from Saturday night to getting on the plane, I literally got a 40-minute nap, slept a little bit on the flight from Seattle to Dallas, and then had a 2.5-hour layover in Dallas. Gave me a chance to watch much of the NFC Championship game. And then got in, did the show last night and didn't have any interest in going out. So I ordered in, got some DoorDash, a little steak and shake. One of the nice things about being in the South. And went to bed and slept for 12 hours. So that felt good, feeling refreshed. But if any of you, by the way, know Mobile or have been here and have a recommendation on a cool place to eat, just casual food, I have no interest in going out and sitting down to any fancy dinners this week. Unless somebody that wants to do some networking and that I want to talk some football with wants to go to a place like that. But just good grub, Southern food, some barbecue. Oysters are a big thing down here. Every time I've asked for a food recommendation from my Lyft driver, from the front desk down in the hotel lobby, they always point me to an oyster place. So that's a big deal down here, apparently, and seafood, which it should be because we're close to the sea, right? All right, let's get into some of this. You guys, hey, there's Bryce. Always good to see you, my friend. We'll get some stuff on. Sorry that the live show crapped out last night. At least when it went out, it was in an appropriate time. Probably about time to wrap that show up anyway. Rockman Drums is here saying hello to Bryce. Marcus Weir can play all over the offensive line. I might have him mixed up, but thoughts? Yeah, another guy that I want to see. Some of the small school guys are really intriguing to me. Clay Webb is a guy, I think, out of Jacksonville State, who was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, ends up playing at a lower level and gets invited here. Those guys really have a chance to make a name for themselves. Corey Dalton, they're multiple 330-pound plus defensive tackles in this class. Would expect the Hawks to come away with one of them. Day one, Tuesday, I think everyone's going to want to talk about the offensive line, and so that'll be the focus. I'll try to get as much video as I can of those guys and give you my impressions. I think that'll be the focus Tuesday night. But Wednesday, I'm going to be looking at the defensive line, and we'll focus. That'll be the focus kind of on Wednesday, and then we'll talk about skill positions on Thursday. And then Friday, there's nothing going on here. It's a dark day, chance to get out and explore the town a little bit, but also sort of go back and watch tape of some of the players that flashed and popped for me those first 3 days. And we'll kind of touch all bases on Friday. And of course, I'm going to look at the quarterbacks the entire time I'm here. A little disappointed that initially we thought Will Howard was going to be here. We thought there was a good chance that Quinn Ewers might end up here. They're not, unfortunately. Especially bummed that Howard isn't here because Riley Leonard is. They both played in the college football playoff game. But I get it in this sense. Leonard still has a lot to prove. He's trying to climb that ladder. He's got some athleticism. He has a lot of production on tape from both Duke and then his time at Notre Dame. Very rhythmic passer, gets the ball out really quick, kind of a game manager type. But there have been questions even leading back to his time at Duke when he had a little bit of potential first-round buzz 2 years ago when he thought about coming out, or at least when the analysts thought he might come out. The arm strength is a question. And so in almost a similar way to what we were looking for last year from Bo Nix when he came down here, although, Nix started out much higher on big boards in the process. Leonard has a much higher ladder to climb. I want to see him push the ball down the field. Looks like conditions are going to be good here this week. There was some concern about that. Brian mentioned on the show Friday he was worried that a practice or two might get rained out, in which case they move inside. And if that were to happen, we don't get access. So cross your fingers and hope. But checking the forecast this morning, looks like the sun's out. And looks like for the week now, the latest is that all throughout the practice days anyway, there should not be much of a threat of rain, and it should be in the mid-60s. So good conditions for these quarterbacks, hopefully, to show what they can do. And we'll be looking to see if Riley Leonard can push the ball down the field. But the fact that he is kind of trying to climb makes a little more sense that he would just do everything he could to overcome the short turnaround and be here. Whereas Will Howard made himself a lot of money in the last 6 weeks. Put a good season together. It took him a little bit to get going. And then once things clicked in that Ryan Day offense, really, really put a nice season together and on tape and started to look more and more like an NFL starting quarterback as the season went along. And then how he performed in the playoffs really jumped him up. And so I can see it for him. He might not have as much to gain by being down here. So we'll see how he does in the rest of the process. But bummed by that. But it opens other opportunities. And there are a couple of small school and even the Canadian quarterback that I cannot wait to see while they're down here, as well as guys like Tyler Shuck out of Louisville, who's played a lot of football and checks in at 6'5", 235-ish. We don't see frames like that very often coming into the NFL anymore. So I'll definitely be talking about the quarterbacks as we go along. Yeah. Yeah, it would have been nice to see Howard here. Was hoping he would at least come do the interview stuff, but I don't think that that's allowed. And what I mean by that is, so Shadur Sanders, right? He chooses to go to the Shrine Bowl instead of the Senior Bowl. Interesting decision right there on its face. And then he gets there and he says that he's not practicing. He's only going to go through the interview process. Well, I think it was Dane Brugler that screenshotted the requirements and the expectations, the rules that the Shrine Bowl sets out. And any player who accepts an invitation and goes is expected to practice and play fully. I'm not sure if that's the case here at the Senior Bowl, although last year we did see Michael Penix show up here a week and a half after the college football playoff, recovering from fractured ribs, beat up, practiced all week, and then chose not to play in the game. So not sure if teams are going to ding Howard for that. I kind of hope they don't. Let's lean on your own evaluations, right? Like let's get the kid in and talk to him and find out who he is. Carmen says, I like Riley's grit I saw in the championship game. Yeah, there's a lot to like about him, but I'm trying to be a little bit more careful this year as I look at these quarterbacks about being drawn to guys that show these types of qualities on tape and being sucked in by it. I put a lot of weight on grit and moxie. And some people kind of scoff at terms like that. I think those are legitimate scouting points and things that you want to look for. John Schneider even talks about it, has in the past, in relation to the year that he drafted Russell Wilson, that he wants a guy that tilts the room, right? Has an aura, a dynamic quality about him that players want to play for and follow. And so while I'm attracted to those qualities, I have been guilty in the past of overvaluing those things. And at the end of the day, there's a ton of those guys that look like they have that on tape. But they don't have the arm strength. They're not physically, big, tall, strong enough. They're not mobile enough. They're not quick enough, processing wise. And so Leonard kind of, the more I look at him, if I'm asking myself really, really hard and honestly, he just kind of looks like a guy who's gonna make a team, but I don't know that I see a starter there, a good starter. But he can change my mind, certainly, as the process goes on. That's really all I wanted to kind of cover as I hop on here today. Again, just to review, today is the introductory press conference at 3:30 Central Time with Executive Director Jim Nagy and a couple of key players. And then that's it as far as what's happening here. And so I'm going to spend the next couple of hours just watching a little more tape and then going and picking up my credentials and getting a lay of the land, getting over there early so I can just figure out where everything is. It's been a long, long time, you guys, since I've actually officially covered a sporting event. So I'm anticipating some flashbacks. To be honest with you, there's a little bit of trepidation. Like, am I going to know what to do, where to go, how to do this? The last time I covered a sporting event, I went to it with, I was thinking about this morning, with a Sony 8mm video camera on my shoulder and a battery pack on the other one. And things were a little different back in that day. Today I'll be covering it with this, with my iPhone and my pen and my binoculars and taking notes and just trying to observe as much as I can and figuring out the best way to approach this. So that'll be fun. And then practices tomorrow, 9:30 to 11, or 9 to 11, 9:30 to 11, and then 11:30 to 1. Yeah, those are the practice times. And then Wednesday, I've got an interview lined up with the developer of the Zebra GPS tracking system that they use down here. So that'll be kind of a fun little diversion and just a little backstory. They outfit every player down here with sensors, so they can track all their movements. They can literally, scouts could look at this information and see how tightly a receiver runs his route, but also top end speed. which I think most scouting staffs now around the league place a little more value on that than they do on 40 times. Like, what's your top end speed? How quickly can you get there in game conditions, in a uniform, on grass? I think that those are important and compelling pieces of information. I like the fact that they still play this game in this stadium. Well, it's a different stadium than it started out in. They've moved across town. We're actually on the campus of South Alabama University, which I did not know until I arrived here this week. But I like that it's on grass. There's some thought that it's safer for them, but it just, some players can be quick on turf and not on grass, if that makes sense. So it's good to see him in that environment. Here's the name of that Canadian quarterback that Bryce knows really well, Taylor Elgersma. He was a late addition, I think, because Howard wasn't going to be here. 6'5", but he looks lean on tape, but physical enough to get out and move okay. And the thing that stands out on tape with this guy is the arm. Like, he has a really natural, easy delivery for someone that tall. He is a rotational thrower, right, Bryce, for a guy that big? But just a really cool, natural-looking thrower. The arm strength is there. I've seen some balls on tape where he's 50 yards down the field, placing it perfectly with a lot of loft, which is an issue for some of these young quarterbacks a lot. We see their deep balls. We see them struggle with their deep balls, sometimes just not putting enough air under it. He almost puts too much at times, and I kind of want to see him just let it go. But he's a guy that I'll be focusing on, and I actually want to have a conversation with Bryce about it near the end of the week on the transition from the Canadian rules down to the U.S. Because when you go watch this kid's tape, you got 3 guys in motion headed towards the line of scrimmage at the time. You have 12 players on the field. Like, what's the transition processing wise and schematically for those guys trying to make that leap? It's been a long time since a quarterback has made the transition from Canada to the U.S. And so he is one of the guys that I'll be watching a lot while I'm down here. All right, let's talk a little bit of Seahawks offensive coordinator, Hawk Maniac 09 again. Can you talk a little bit about how Clint Kubiak might affect the offensive draft and what he might be looking for? Or is that TBD until we start hearing from him? Those conversations have already happened. It's been a 2-week process now, at minimum 2 weeks since he interviewed in person. He was the first one to do it, so he's been involved in the process the longest. As long as they sort of stretch things out and explore different options with Hank Fraley, of course, maybe in conjunction with Kubiak. The fact that they ended up settling on him yesterday and hiring him and announcing it so quickly tells me they wanted to get it done before the Senior Bowl so he can be involved. I'll let you know if I see him here. But yeah, I think John Schneider is absolutely a general manager that always wants to take input and get players that his coaches want to coach. He talks about how their evaluations are done for their roster, not for how they would fit into the rest of the league, and that they do include need in their scouting grade. As much as we hear him talk about best player available, and some people think that he should draft more for need, he has said on the record that they include need in the grade and that's part of it. And so when you hear that the player they took at 18 was the player at, let's say they take a tight end or a corner, right? Or an edge guy. Well, he was the number 1 player on our board. And then people come out and go, hey, it's not the biggest need. They should have taken a tackle. Well, need was part of the grade that had them at the top of their board. And so, yeah, I think there are certain types of players that they'll be wanting to look for to fit his system. I absolutely think wide receiver is a need, and that's a group I am not yet intimately familiar with and can't wait to see while I'm here, because leading up to the draft, when you look at some of the guys that are at the top of some of these big boards, outside of Tet McMillan, they're mostly smaller framed players, more slot type players. And I think what the Seahawks need, because they have JSN, who can play outside but lives in the slot, was literally one of the best slot receivers production-wise in the NFL this last year. That and then the fact that Tyler Lockett will most likely be moving on here in the next month or two. whether or not DK Metcalf is on this roster next year or moving forward or not, I think the need is to get another outside guy. Someone that can play in and out, sure, that's always great. But a guy that can take the top off a little bit, give him a deep threat, and also run a full route tree. And so as you get closer to the draft, you start learning about players that you weren't as aware of that do fit more of that mold. And so we'll see how that works. And then when it comes to offensive linemen, that's a big one, right? Who's the offensive line coach? I said on the show last night, I think that may have already been determined. We're hearing the name John Benton a lot today because he was the offensive line coach in New Orleans, I think, last year. Is that correct? With Kubiak, but also is a coaching free agent, is my understanding, isn't under contract currently, unless it is to the Saints, in which case those coaches are all free to look for other work. But he was the offensive line coach with the 49ers from 2019 to 21, I think. Those were very, very good years for that offensive line. And also in a scheme that's similar insofar as how they execute the run game. So, yeah, I think his input will be pretty valuable when it comes to scouting what types of players that they want to get. Along those lines as well, from McKeon Silver, really want to know who Kubiak wants for O-line coach and maybe run game coordinator. Touched on the O-line coach, and I would expect that to be potentially a combination role. We've seen that a lot in this league in the past. In fact, it's becoming more common than not, I think, that the offensive line coach has some say in the run game. We saw that with Tom Cable here to varying degrees of success. Andy Dickerson, when he was here, was also the offensive line coach and run game coordinator. Rick Dennison is another name that was in New Orleans last year that Kubiak may consider bringing with him. 15 years of experience in the NFL. He's had exposure to coaching offensive lines and been involved in run games. And so that's a guy that could be out there as well. And honestly, I don't know. Andy Dickerson is a free agent now as well. He was let go as part of the purging of that offensive staff in Cleveland in the offseason. Maybe they liked him well enough here in Seattle that he could be in the mix. I'm not sure. That's spitballing top of my head right there. Yeah, Bryce says John Benton. Haven't had a chance to really get out there and see what the buzz is this morning because I've been focused on the game. But Brian Myers, edge is what I'm looking forward to watching some potential Hawk first rounders of this game. Absolutely. This is a great point. And I want to start getting this out there now. So by the time the draft comes around, y'all are like, hey, Dan said, because I just not maybe I worded that poorly. Not because I want the credit, but just because I want you to look at the draft a little bit differently. Everyone wants to mock an offensive lineman to the Seahawks in the first round. The draft is 4 months away, 3.5 months away. If the Seahawks wait until the draft to address their offensive line and then paint themselves into a corner where they have to take a lineman in the first round, first of all, that's a fail. Because A, do you really think the way to fix this line that is so young, probably now that Laken Tomlinson is off the roster, without a doubt, I don't even have to look at the numbers, the youngest offensive lineman or line in the league. When Charles Cross is your grizzled veteran heading into his fourth year, and Abe Lucas into his fourth year, and then Oluwatimi into his third year, Bradford into his third year, LaMea into his second year, Sundell into his second year, Jarrell into his second year, Haynes into his second year. You see where I'm going with this? You want to add another young player to that, and that's how you're going to put that line over the top? They have to address this early in free agency, and they will. I assure you. I will be shocked if they don't. So that's A. B, still might get there, and the best player on the board is an offensive lineman, and that makes the most sense, and they go that way. But also, it's not the way John Schneider operates generally. What does he like to do in free agency? Hedge against the draft. Take his biggest holes and add competition there. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Last offseason, the 7 or 8 free agents he brought in, none of them made a big impact. That was a swing and a miss. That was a bad offseason for John. But this year, he has the benefit of really knowing what his coaches are looking for. What's the scheme fit? What they want, maybe slightly different qualities than they've scouted in the past. And so he was kind of working from behind last year. But defensive line could absolutely, and I would make the argument that defensive line should be the pick. That to build the kind of dominant defense Mike Macdonald wants to build, you have to add a couple more difference makers on that defensive line. Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams isn't enough. It's not. Jaron Reed's a free agent. I think they'll bring him back. It makes sense, but they're going to be bringing him back at the age of 33. Jonathan Hankins was disappointing. I think this was the year that the old slugger lost just a little bit of bat speed and just can't hit home runs anymore. He was on a 1-year deal. He's gone. Roy Robertson Harris has 2 years left on his contract, but it's all non-guaranteed money, and the Seahawks need to free up some cap space. Now, he was a good fit. I think it makes sense to bring him back. He seems like he wants to be here. A restructure makes all the sense in the world, but it might not. Draymond Jones will probably be a cap cut. Maybe they redo his deal because they like what he offered, but I don't think so. I think he's gone. So that defensive line that we thought was so deep last year, that Joe Marino said on his pregame podcast last year, he put him right there with the Cleveland Browns as the deepest defensive line group in the league. And he included, even when you're talking about 3-4 teams, he included edge guys in that. Or that it can very quickly become not so deep. Plus, you want to add guys that allow Murphy to do maybe what his best fit is. So they have to take advantage of this defensive line group. I said on the show Friday that if I was a betting man, I'd put a bunch of money on the fact that one of these defensive linemen or edge players, at least one, that are playing in this game this week will be Seahawks. There are, as one of the commenters mentioned earlier, many more defensive nose tackle types, 330 plus, to plug the middle in this draft. Many of them, all throughout the draft. You can get one on day 2 or 3 in this draft that could play key snaps, because we just haven't seen. We thought Cam Young might be that guy. He just can't stay healthy, right? And as much as we liked Mike Morris and his length and size as a big edge, he stayed healthy last year and never really cracked the rotation. And so not sure what that means for his future. And so if you have a chance at 18 to get a game-changing type edge player, to me, that makes a ton of sense. Because by my theory, right, we get to the draft, we're going to have a dressed offensive line in a way that we're going to feel pretty good about. And so you go take one of these big edges, and there's a ton of them. Last year, the year before, most of the edge players at the top of most analyst boards were lighter guys. Guys like Mike Green out of Marshall. Guys like Nolan Smith, right? Smaller guys off the edge. There's 6 or 7 guys playing in the game this week that are 6'6" to 6'7", 260 to 290 pounds. Right? Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart and Landon Jackson. Bunch of guys that fit that mold. Jordan Birch. Is he down here? I think he is. And so that just, to me, adding defense first in the first round makes the most sense. So I'll be watching those guys heavily. I think that's a great point. Bryce says my Wi-Fi's having a little issues again. It looks okay from this end. So hopefully, are you guys seeing it okay? Because yesterday when it started to have issues, I could see it from here. Even though it says my connection's unstable, it looks like the stream is okay. Let me get to a couple more of these and then I'll wrap up and get going. Yeah, here we go. Brian Meyer says, let's get McDonald a couple more D pieces, some combo of edge, nose tackle, safety, another linebacker. Absolutely. I think a Kyle Hamilton style weapon might be on the table too. Absolutely. I was watching, is it Jihad? No, not as Barron out of Texas. Is one example of a guy real physical at corner. Because of that, could project inside. I'm telling you, if they could get a guy because of his frame, I'm in the camp that I would prefer Devin Witherspoon play outside. I really would. I know the havoc he can wreak closer to the line of scrimmage, and you can still flip him around and sneak him up on the line and do some things like that with corner blitzes or switch him inside on occasion. But if they could find a guy Obviously, if they can find a guy like Kyle Hamilton, hell yeah, let's happen. But even a guy that can handle that role and, cover linebackers and tight ends, get after the quarterback, and also, has adequate run support to free up Witherspoon to move outside. Because if you're sticking with Witherspoon on the inside, now let's add outside corner to the list of draft needs big time. Because Trey Brown's a free agent, don't think he'll be back. Josh Jobs showed great things last year. Will most likely be tendered as an exclusive rights guy. But, small sample size, right? I hesitate to anoint him as good enough to be an everyday starter. And then, Reek Woolen, while his coverage numbers were good last year, there's still moments on tape that make you wonder. So there's and we don't know about Nehemiah Pritchett yet, really. He got some run late in the year, and he's obviously a guy they like well enough to elevate him. Took him in the 5th round last year, but we'll see. Jury's still out on whether he can be a starter. So these corners are a group you got to look at too. Bryce says he'll be doing a deep dive on Kubiak and his relationships throughout the league tonight on my show. So check out Hawk Zone Rundown over there with those guys. Corey Dalton, if they want to, a year ahead, they should be drafting to replace Mafe and Nwosu in 26 right now. Thank you for bringing this up. I meant to make it in my point earlier, but I got off on a tangent a little bit. What? Me on a tangent? That never happens. We like Mafe, and we like Derek Hall. 8.5 sacks this year. And we like Uchenna Nwosu. And I fully expect Nwosu to be back on a new deal. Again, a bunch of unguaranteed money. They can clear up some cap space that way. I think they want him in the locker room. They want him on the field. None of those. We like them. They're nice players. None of those guys, even though Hall took a big step forward this year, I don't know that Mafe did. I think he looked like the same player in 24 to me that he did in 23. Nice players, not game changers. There will be stretches where they're invisible, where they don't make an impact. You see what some of these guys do around the league and just wreaking havoc. Even some unsung guys that we're not getting that on a consistent basis. So if you have a chance to add that kind of guy, and we're not going to get a shot at, we're not going to get Abdul Carter, but another guy to add to that group that's more explosive, heck yes. Sign me up for that, which is why I like some of these bigger guys, because they do offer a little bit of a different look and role potentially than what we have on hand. Yeah. Brian says, need an edge that other teams OC has to game plan around. Yeah, I don't know that they do when it comes to Mafe and Hall. Cash Money Killer says, man, you look serious, locked in. I'm locked in. This is a big week. Been looking forward to this for a long time. This is going to be fun. Guys, I think that day is here. I may just have to wear the glasses all the time. Yeah, here's the guy from South Carolina, right? Nick Manawari. He's a bigger safety, projects the guy to play at every level. Yeah, really, really interesting to see how that guy looks. All right, let's wrap it up from here. I got to get some things done, watch a little tape, pick up my credentials, get some lunch, and get over to, and now I can't remember the name of the stadium, but get over here. I'm gonna be right here soon. Again, tune in tonight. I'll go live again, and tell you what I thought of what Jim Nagy said about the game and the players that we get a chance to hear from today as well. In the meantime, follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Follow at The Pick Is In Pod on Twitter and Blue Sky as well. But get over to the YouTube channel and subscribe to that. That's the draft channel with Bryce Coots and I. We will be doing some content from there. I think we have plans for something on Thursday or Saturday as well that'll just take a look at that some non-Seahawk draft implications down here. And I think we're talking about doing an all Senior Bowl mock draft or something along those lines as well. But just get over there and do that too. That's a channel that we just established a couple of weeks ago. There's a couple of pieces of content up there already. And if you want to support the channel in any other way, you can find all of those links down in the description as well. That'll do it for me. Guys, thanks so much for watching. And for those of you who contributed to help send me here, I cannot thank you enough. And even though I will continue to do so as the week goes along and beyond. So thanks. I'm Dan. Forever and always go Hawks. We'll see you soon.